the beginning of man, there was flight. For billions of years, the planets hurled in captive orbits around the sun. Since the dawn of time, man has sought to fly. He listened to the wind and the sea and watched the birds, and his soul flew with them. And man triumphed. Like an eagle, he can mount the wind and ride its swiftness. He can go among the clouds and touch their softness. Steve Cohen, Birdman. Steve Cohen is only 24, but he is already one of the world's greatest kite flyers. The sky is his domain, the wind his element, and they gave him the great gift, flight. When Steve first flew off Bald Hill, 30 miles south of Sydney on Australia's magnificent east coast, he was treading in the footsteps of one who had sought this gift. This man, Lawrence Hargrave, one of the great pioneers of aviation. Hargrave was one of the first to experiment with monoplanes and air screws. He invented the box kite and built the world's first rotary engine. In 1894, Hargrave made his only flight. These box kites lifted him 16 feet off Bald Hill. Today, Steve Cohen gives Hargrave's dreams a power and beauty the inventor would have applauded. Steve lives to fly, and he flies whenever the wind is right, heedless of the other elements. According to Greek mythology, the first men to fly were the Athenian Daedalus and his son Icarus, until the sun melted the wax on Icarus's wings. 15th century genius Leonardo da Vinci designed the first flapping wing ornithopter, but no man had enough muscle to get it aloft. On November 21, 1783, a hot air balloon fired by bundles of chopped straw flew over Versailles for 25 minutes. The world's first aviators were Frenchmen Jean-François Pilatre de Rosières and Marquis d'Arlandes. 2 years later, de Rosières made history again. His balloon caught fire and crashed, and he became the world's first air fatality. German industrialist Otto Lilienthal. In 1891, Lilienthal paved the way to modern aviation with the world's first heavier-than-air flight in a kite built of bamboo and calico. He had his workmen build him a hill for the launch. Lilienthal made more than 2,000 successful flights in 5 years, until his kite collapsed and plunged him 30 feet to his death. Then, 20th century technology took over. Flight was no longer a dream, but an everyday reality.
1, 0, all engine running.
Science gave man rocket power the early inventors could not have imagined. And in 1969, it thrust him to the moon. Only 66 years had elapsed since Wilbur and Orville Wright made the first powered flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. But man was already looking backwards. In 1962, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration of America asked scientist Francis M. Rogallo to design an Earth re-entry vehicle for spaceships. Rogallo turned to the basic precepts of powerless flight and built his now famous Rogallo wing. Steve Cohen also builds Rogallo wings, but his kites cost only $450. Steve taught himself all the necessary trades and builds the kites in his Sydney workshop. Kites have to be tough and light, so the frame is 1.5-inch lightweight alloy tubing. The wings are made of 4.5-ounce nylon sailcloth. A finished kite weighs only about 35 pounds, but it can lift a 500-pound load. Steve shares the workshop with Stephen Haig, who builds surf skis.
Haig, the seat's ready. Okay, going. Actually, that was true. Right. Let's go. Oh, it feels terrific.
Steve test flies every kite he builds. His kites are designed to take stresses of 5 Gs, and Steve strains every strut and ounce of fabric almost to the limit.
Usually I look towards the inside wingtip, how tight I can get the turn and watch the ground whirl around. If you do too many, you get a little giddy.
Steve is hitting 35 miles an hour. The fastest he has flown is 75 miles an hour in a dive.
I've held a 90-degree bank and for almost a complete 360-degree turn. The forces that are going on your body and the strength it takes to hold it there is really fantastic. You can feel your face and your muscles in your body very, very tense, holding the controls, and your face especially feels the wind pressing on it and it feels like it wants to fall off. It just feels like your body wants to come apart.
Steve pushes the rudder bar forward to go up, back to go down. He tilts it in the direction he wants to turn.
Probably one of the most dangerous things that can ever happen to you in the air is flying tailwind back towards the hill and stalling. It can just drive you straight back into the side of the hill so quickly. Flyers crack up usually when they panic, and I've seen quite a few flyers go in that way now.
One down, another to go. Kites need about a 10-knot headwind to get off.
Sometimes when I'm flying, or when the flying conditions are smooth, you just forget about the kite, and it's just like I'm up there flying, and you're completely relaxed. Occasionally, I have to look up and see if the kite's still there. Wherever I want to go, I just look in that direction. That's the way I'm going. I never believed that you really couldn't fly, and now I've proved it for myself that you can.
Here, the wind never stops blowing. This wild place attracts the wild. Here, with only the gulls to show him how, Steve Cohen taught himself to fly. Now Steve brings his student flyers to the sand dunes at Cornell to teach them how to fly and stay alive. This will be Hag's last training session. Then his next jump will be off Bald Hill. Assembly is the only part of kite flying that is easy and completely safe. That first flight is unnerving, even on sand dunes. So Cohen often goes along to make sure no one panics. Oh, no. Will our heroine make it? Now, here comes Mr. Furious. Sand can be awfully hard. Hag thinks he can fly well enough to break all the rules. This young lady sticks with the rules and makes it look easy. But it isn't, even if you've got the nerve. Hag had better be watching hard. It's a big jump from the sand hills to Bald Hill. The southeast wind begins above the Antarctic and travels 3,000 miles before it hits Bald Hill. Steve Cohen loves this wind because it means good flying. Five flyers have been killed in Australia in the last 2 years, and more than a score in America. So Hag's first mistake today could be his last. Scared, Hag? These fellas weren't so lucky either. This is it. Steve is going along to keep a watchful eye on his protege. The first jump is the worst one. It will be a lot easier next time. This is the very private world of Sunday morning. So far. Steve Cohen is flying one of his favorite routes. And no wonder. Sorry, love. Whoops. It is not recommended that beginners try this. One slip and Steve could be flying without his kite.
Smooth air is beautiful flying. Sometimes it just feels like silk. You've really got to fly in conditions like that before you really believe what it's like. And it's very, very rare. It's just so beautiful that you've got to do it to believe it. After a while, you almost feel like you've run out of things to do in the air, but you always find new ones. It's just a never-ending world.
Just like butterflies. Hello, whirly bird. What are you doing up here? I guess it's a free sky. In this sport, a guy could lose his trousers or a leg. Gotcha. Canowindra cattle country, calm and 300 miles from Sydney's air lanes. Steve is going to take a ride to 8,000 feet, hanging like a spider beneath a hot air balloon. Then he'll drop. It takes 65,000 feet of air to fill this monster. And once it is ready to lift, there is no waiting, no time for second thoughts. Steve is saving his strength. He'll need every ounce of it when the thermals hit him high above the ground.
Limited 5792, you copy?
Steve is lifting at 500 feet a minute. This is the biggest roller coaster of all. This is why birds sing. In still air, even Steve can't stay up forever. Steve is right on target and as light as a ballet dancer. The northeast face of Saddleback Mountain. No gentle wind ever blows here. Over Saddleback's 600-foot precipice is the supreme challenge for kite flyers. Today, Hag will become the fifth man to achieve it. Saddleback is 2,000 feet above the sea, but it is not the height which makes it dangerous. It's the wind, ever changing, and the clouds which can suddenly shroud it. A storm can blow up here in 5 minutes and tear a kite to shreds. Steve was the second man to fly off Saddleback.
When you're standing on the boards at Saddleback, it's very, very terrifying. You just can't feel what the air's going to be like until you actually run off the edge of the boards and you're out into it. It feels like you leaped out into a 20-foot wave, and it's a continuous fight until you get further away from the ridge. when you're fighting the turbulence. It throws the kite from side to side, makes it roll very quickly. You're continually throwing your body in the opposite direction, trying to keep the glider steady. Sometimes it feels like there's a giant comes up and grabs hold of the nose of the kite and rattles it, and then lets you go.
Final flourish, Steve heads in for a landing. Terry Gallagher was the first man to fly off Saddleback. The storm has arrived, but it's now or never for Hag. Minutes in these conditions is enough for anyone's first flight off Saddleback. 38 knots, past every safety limit, but Steve is determined to get off again. Almost too rough for even Steve to fly.
an hour, you've just had enough. And it feels so good to be back on the ground.
The Chinese invented the sport of kite fighting thousands of years ago. But even their fertile minds would have trouble imagining the aerial dogfight which is about to take place. Steve and Hag will fight to cut off each other's streamers with their kites. The streamers are only 50 feet long, so the risk of mid-air collision is high. The same elementary rules of all aerial dogfighting since the First World War apply. Get your height and dive on your victim's tail for the kill. For Hag, the early maneuvering is vital. Once Steve locks onto his tail, he won't let go. And that will be the end for Hag. Hag's on the run. A hit. Steve's got his first ribbon. A hit. Another hit. a little late. It's the kill. Hag has lost his last ribbon. Hard luck, Hag. Steve Cohen was born to fly. For him, the wind holds no terror. He is what man has always yearned to be. He is Steve Cohen, Birdman.
Hang gliding has been called the sport of the 21st century, the ultimate in freedom, beauty and motion. Its devotees say it's like surfing in 3 dimensions, an exciting new form of exploration of time and space. An Australian, John Dickinson of Sydney, is credited with putting together the hang glider as it's known today. And since 1967, it has captured the imagination of everyone who has dreamed of flight, of conquering nature. However, deaths from hang gliding accidents have been making headlines ever since the sport took off some 15 years ago. Hang gliders are made of aluminium tubular frames braced with stainless steel wire and covered with specially designed Dacron sails. They're light, easily transportable and need no backup equipment or airport. Prices range from $600 to $1,200. And at those figures, the world of aviation and aerial adventure is open to tens of thousands who would never be able to afford an aeroplane. Despite their simplicity, the gliders have remarkable performance characteristics, and mastering the skills required for safe flying demands careful coaching. The sandhills of Kurnell in Sydney have been the training ground for hundreds of hang glider pilots. Every weekend at Kurnell, beginners learn from skilled instructors the basic points of getting off the ground. The The transition from Earthman to Birdman isn't without its hazards. Even the first lesson can be dangerous. Watch this girl as she loses control and panics.
Feel that? Feel it lifting you. Feel it lifting you a little bit. Get the left-hand side up a little bit. Okay, that's good speed. Push out a little bit. Push out. Push out. Pull in. Pull in. Push out a little bit. Swing to your left. To your left. To your left. And pull in. Push out a little bit. Push out.
She hit the ground and a spectator in a dive at 60 kilometers an hour. The spectator escaped serious injury, but the girl flying the kite broke a leg. The high accident rate among flyers and complaints from the public led to the introduction in January this year of federal regulations governing the sport. Policing the regulations is in the hands of the clubs affiliated with the Australian Hang Gliding Association. Since insurance is compulsory and the cheapest insurance is through clubs, the majority of hang glider flyers are club members, and thus most flying is now strictly controlled. Even so, it's still a dangerous sport, and not one for the foolhardy or faint-hearted. Danny Scott began flying when he was only 13, and on this occasion was taking part in a self-soaring and aerobatics competition at Stanwell Park on the south coast of New South Wales. The takeoff point on Bald Hill is 500 metres above sea level and one of the 50 officially recognised hang gliding sites in New South Wales. Clubs grade members according to ability. A beginner is a Hang 1 flyer. The champions are Hang 5 grade. All the flying sites are similarly graded, so in this competition, the flyers had to be at least Hang 3 standard. When the airspace becomes crowded with competitive flyers, it takes skill to avoid a mid-air collision, or in the jargon of the sport, an egg roll. When Danny Scott took off, there was a 15-knot wind blowing from the southeast, making conditions almost ideal for flying. The event involved demonstrating as many complicated manoeuvres as possible, followed by a precision landing on the beach in the shortest time. Hang gliders can do almost all the aerobatic manoeuvres that powered aircraft can, with the exception of loop-the-loop. When talking about their sport, hang gliding enthusiasts speak of chasing seagulls, harnessing the wind, and about silence, solitude, and power. For them, it's the ultimate trip. For 27 Australians, it's quite literally been the ultimate trip. That number have so far been killed in hang gliding accidents. The hang glider pilot controls his flight through moving the trapeze bar he holds with both hands. Push the bar forward and the nose rises. Pull it back and the nose comes down. Lean left and push the bar forward slightly and the glider begins to turn left. Lean to the right and the glider will turn right. With these simple movements, manned, powerless flight becomes a reality. But it requires skill, fine judgment and delicate control to make precision landings on a target a long way from the launching zone. A pinpoint landing such as this one is a high scorer in competition. But sometimes the approach run can be hampered by a build-up of descending kites and slow clearance of the landing area. Throughout all events, club safety officials keep a close watch on the action so that help is always available for flyers who get into difficulties.
Back off, there are too many flyers in the landing area. Keep the landing area clear.
This was far from a perfect landing, but the flyer, Steve Gilmore, was only 16. A much better finish. Veteran flyer Stephen Haig brought his personally designed kite in for a spot-on landing. Danny Scott ran out of air in the final moments of his flight, but it wasn't a bad effort for a 15-year-old. More experienced flyers overseas have been dropped from balloons 10,000 metres up, and others, riding thermal currents, have soared to 5,000 metres. But flying high isn't the big kick in power soaring, a sport that gives flyers a power-boosted takeoff with a speedboat. At this competition at Shoal Bay on the central coast of New South Wales, Stephen Gilmore was given some advice and assistance by Stephen Moyes, Sydney's world champion kite flyer and son of Bill Moyes, a pioneer of hang gliding in Australia, who also became world champion.
It's going to be hard to spot. It's so rough.
Tow kiting can be more dangerous than foot-launched kiting. The kites are subject to great pressure at takeoff and during towing, which can be at very high speed. In this event, the tow lasted only a short while, just long enough to get each flyer up as high as the 200-metre tow rope would allow. Once free of the tow, competitors had to make as many spirals as possible during the descent to the landing zone. A slight miscalculation of boat speed or an error by the flyer can result in an abortive takeoff, but rescues are generally swift. When hang gliding was at its peak a year ago, an estimated 5,000 people were flying hang gliders in Australia. The number of registered flyers has dropped significantly since the introduction of compulsory insurance and other federal regulations on the sport. However, there's still no shortage of people with the urge to get high on these fragile wings to at least taste the thrills of soaring, even if they don't become hooked on the magic feeling of bird-like freedom that sustains the hardcore gliding enthusiasts. The big surprise of this competition at Shoal Bay was the performance by Russell Duncan, a 13-year-old from Newcastle. He was the youngest flyer in the event, which carried a first prize of $1,000. Russell's initial attempt at takeoff was a disaster. A sudden tailwind caused him to lose airspeed. The wind played havoc with the flyers throughout the contest by frequently changing direction and velocity. Although wet and shaken, Russell Duncan promptly prepared for another takeoff. This time, he made a near-perfect flight that included an impressive 14 spirals. Turning out of his last spiral, Russell dropped from his prone position and after a fine approach, dropped into the center of the landing target. The flight won him second place and $500. One of the top competitors was Stephen Moyes, 3 times winner of the World Tow Gliding Championship. He was also third place getter in the inaugural World Hang Gliding Championships in 1976. Not surprisingly, he won this event too. Stephen Moyes will be a member of the Australian team taking part in the second World Hang Gliding Championships in Grenoble in France next month. Australia is sending 16 flyers to the event and they're confident of doing well, even though new flyers of high calibre from other countries are expected to make the competition tougher this year. There was a tragedy for the Australian team last month when one of the top flyers, John Ogden of Toowoomba in Queensland, was killed in Spain. He was practicing for the World Championships when his kite clipped a tree and crashed into a mountainside. When the first hang gliders appeared in Australian skies, the sport was branded as a pastime for eccentrics with a death wish. Few understood the giddy sweetness which flyers said they experienced while soaring like birds, sometimes into air lanes and often high enough to appear on radar screens. Now, with greater organisation and control, the sport has achieved a high degree of public and official acceptance.